Hey y'all, so welcome back. If you didn't get to catch my first chapter review of Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, go ahead and check that video out now. We are now on chapter 2 of Dream Count, and just jumping right back in. So this chapter, it has no title. It is a long chapter as it spans 43 pages. It spans 43 pages. Like, girl, I don't know what you was going through when you was writing this book. But 43 pages for a chapter? I mean, I know before we were talking about how chapter 1 was really short and it was only 14 pages, but we went 14 to 43. Okay. I think the middle ground between that is like 23 pages. I think that's like a sensible amount of pages for a chapter. Because I feel like that's why it took me so long to get through chapter 2, to be honest. It's just so long. And in between that, I've also been taking care of my mother who has been rather ill. Um, she has a physical disability and everything. So while I'm home, I sort of help with that and I stop in between to, get my reading in on my breaks and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's why it's taking me so long. But this chapter, it opens with Chia, Chia for short, because now I think the author has also sort of recognized that saying Chia every time, reading Chia every time is sort of difficult on the reader to sort of try to remind them of the pronunciation, maybe. But obviously, as I said in the previous video, Chia might also be short for Chimamanda, who is the author of the book as well. So from here on out, Chia Maka is Chia, right? Yeah, so it opens with Chia introducing us to and describing her love interest, who is a pro-black African American man named Darnell. Also, I just also want to say, like, please excuse if you hear any noise in the background. My younger sister is home visiting, and so she might be in and out this room where I am recording right now. Oh, and to get back to it, this chapter is mainly Chia describing their romantic relationship and how they went from tolerating each other to falling out of love completely. While this chapter is mainly from Chia's perspective, she is sure to include her friends' and family's perspectives to show their disapproval of her dating this Darnell character. From Chia's Nigerian American perspective alone, she always felt like she was walking on eggshells in their relationship and could never win over his approval. In the end of the chapter, she ultimately disliked his arrogance and did not like the fact that he tried to control her and wanted her to be very submissive toward him. And so, of course, when I brought up earlier that he's a pro black African American man, that was very important to this chapter, as now we know Chia is a Nigerian American woman. And even though this was sort of foreshadowed in the first chapter with her describing her family and friends back home in Nigeria, this was one of the important factors within her romantic relationship with Darnell, as to like how she probably foreshadowed how the relationship would turn out and everything. Because even though we're all a part of the same African diaspora, as we know, there are different cultures that exist within the African diaspora, and that can play a role into who you decide to date and everything, and how comfortable you are with their friends and family and their ideology. My ex-husband was Nigerian, and I know we clashed a little bit sometimes on the ideology. Even though I think foundationally we're both pro-black and everything, there were still other things, cultural differences that we would butt heads on moving forward. And once again, I'm reading from the notes that I took on this chapter, because not only was this a long chapter, but obviously I want to be able to recall everything properly and, give you all the best content. That's why I'm reading from like this Google Word doc thing. However, the language and tone used throughout the chapter always conveyed a sense of hope, as though things would become better over time. They would reconnect and the relationship would be salvaged. So it was shocking, to say the least, that they were unable to reconcile their differences, but the persuasiveness of the writing made me as a reader progressively empathize with Chia. Thus far, with both of the chapters, I have noticed a pattern of hope, nuance, and disappointment. I think the underlying antagonist in this novel are all of the things that can potentially destroy our dreams. However, it seems as though this book thus far is essentially saying that we are the pilots of our own lives and we decide if our dreams flourish or burn to the ground. However, there were some poignant examples in this chapter that show that some choices we make don't make sense in the grand scheme of supporting the dreams we want to flourish, while other choices make complete sense in destroying dreams that we merely thought we wanted to flourish. Chia seems to be an all encompassing character who battles with internal conflict, but uses her discernment in the end to pivot and make choices that allow her to move closer to the life she wants to live. Overall, I liked how this chapter described in depth what led Chia to breaking up with her boyfriend, Darnell. At first, I was a bit apprehensive with how she described his pro blackness, as I am a pro black African American woman myself. We've already established I'm Pan Africanist. But I liked how Chia's perspective displayed more empathy than judgment in the end. I also found it refreshing to see that the same flaws that I noticed in some of the men in my community are also noticed by other women in the diaspora and are relatably frowned upon. However, with all this being said, I believe the chapter ended on a note of strength and moving on from something that isn't for you instead of sadness over a breakup. Those were my notes for this chapter. I just thought it was interesting how Chia made this choice to sort of switch from where we began in the first chapter, from her describing her time during the pandemic and some of the things that she was noticing in the world, to going, deeper into her personal life and sort of pivoting to show us what else she's been noticing in her own life and everything. And it sort of, starts us on this path of, okay, these are the things that she likes and dislikes, this character Chia and everything. And we're getting into her character development a little bit more, like what, she considers to be painful, what draws certain emotions out of her decision making process and everything. And honestly, with this chapter, it really sort of gave insight to how much her friends and family sort of, you know, help her in her decision making and sort of persuade her to make certain decisions as well. You could tell that they are a grounding presence in her life and really, give her a foundation to go off of as to like maybe how she would want to be treated in romantic relationships and what her expectations of this world and society should be. Honestly, more than anything, she is a relatable character to me as an African American, even as an African American woman, not just an African woman. A lot of the things in this chapter were much more relatable on the sense of like, girl, I've been there, done that. I've been with some, men in my community who have, sort of made me realize that some people outside of our community who say negative things aren't completely wrong, because there are too many men in my community who give our part of the diaspora or our culture, a bad rap. And so it's just like, do better. And it's like, no matter what level, what socioeconomic level you're on, even if you're wealthy, there are still things that you need to work on as a human being, especially if you plan on developing relationships in your life. And I mean, that also spoke to me too, just being an African American person, and not necessarily being like Nigerian or from a specific country in Africa. Some of the things I might say might seem sort of arrogant, or I might talk about my pro blackness a little bit too much, or I might have, the oddest expectations of other people in the diaspora simply because my scope has been so limited on life. I definitely believe that's because, I haven't traveled that much, and, I still have a lot more in life that I want to be able to do to really say that I am a well rounded person as well. And on that note, this video is officially too long. Is So I'm just gonna wrap it up and just also, add a little bit of a side note outside of, this chapter's review, just to say that I believe an evolving media landscape should embrace the idea of a liberal society, because I believe a liberal society allows everyone's voice to be heard. Um, and it allows even conservative voices to be heard as well. And I feel like everyone's voice should be heard for us to get a better sense of where society is and where it is headed, and to not only hinder some of the more negative ideologies that exist in our society, or to stop them from growing, but also to grow the ones that should have space to grow, and to also be aware of the counter narratives out there that exist that can help this society become a more well rounded one. Because I think, there are just too many of us that live in these bubbles and don't really understand how empathy works and how humanity works, unfortunately. And while I understand that some of my ideologies might seem a bit extreme and might seem a bit one sided, I do understand that as someone who has always been misidentified as biracial and, or Hispanic or everything outside of just African, I think I've been able to sort of have a sense of empathy for other people and other who, sort of somewhat belong in other bubbles per se, in society. And just understanding that, I think every voice should be heard, and that every person should be seen as a human being as well. And with that being said, while I understand that we all would like a much more peaceful environment to live in, wherever we are in the world, I do think having uncomfortable conversations is important for society to progress as well. And I don't think any of these uncomfortable conversations that should ever lead to violence, any of that. However, I just think everyone should be heard at the end of the day. Of course, this is all coming from me just seeing, and I think all of us just seeing where American society is possibly headed, and how we're still trying to combat some of the, or a lot of the bad things that are happening within our society. And yeah, I just think that was really important to include. And also, on another unrelated note, I just was listening to this new song called Drama by Jordan Adetunji, and I really like the song. And I think you all should, maybe tune into that song, and I think you all would like that song as well. I think it's very unique, and it's not a song title that you even hear a lot of the time. I just love how there are more and more artists that are coming out who don't just talk about, like, the typical stuff you would hear about in songs. So, yeah, I just think there should be more original music out there. And I've been working on some songwriting projects of my own, and I can't wait to share that with you all soon. So thanks again for tuning in. Yeah, thanks for sticking with me, guys. In the next video, we'll be getting into chapter 3.